Days here at Guardian Games in Portland, Oregon. This is Portland Paper. I'm Travis Cooper, hanging out with the producer this evening,
Ian,
and we're watching some Modern. It looks like we got a pretty cool matchup here. Blue-Black Faeries versus Affinity. And we've got it started. We had just a Blink Moth and a Mox Opal in turn 1 for Vinny Balistreri, and we had Swamp Inquisition for Zeke. So yeah, this seems like an interesting matchup here, where if Zeke is able to develop a Bitter Blossom that does Stonewall Fairies, but if this Steel Overseer that Vinny plays gets to survive, then that can pump everything out of blocking range, but it's going to eat a Fatal Push.
and it looks like Vinny doesn't have much gas besides that. He's sitting on 2 Galvanic Blasts and 2 Spire of Industries, so he's going to have to try and get there with some artifact or some Blink Moth beats.
And we're going to get an animation with that Blink Moth, and Zeke's going to drop to 19. Curious if we have a Bitter Blossom here. Right now seems like a pretty good time to deploy that enchantment if we've got it. No Bitter Blossom. But
I'm
Berries
not
is full of interaction.
I'm not one to call games early, but I like being in Zeke's position, looking at an Affinity player with access to 5 mana
In
and
an
Ornithopter out.
Ornithopter. Oh, we're going to get a Snapcaster Fatal Push here on that Blink Moth Nexus. I'm curious if we're going to see one of these Gal Blast go after that Snapcaster. And we do. So Vinny left with just a Gal Blast, and Zeke is going to untap and potentially be in Cryptic Command range.
So Vinny just desperately hoping for an experimental frenzy here. What kind of draws get him out of this? Maybe a...
Oh, I'm not sure, because I was looking at Zeke's hand, and it looks like we do have that Cryptic Command, so I think Vinny's going to probably just have to draw for a while and hopefully bait out a counterspell, but alright, Zeke is going to get aggressive here. I'm surprised about that move there. So perhaps a Etch Champion would do it, but looks like we just have an Inkmoth Nexus for Vinny.
This Fairies deck is interesting because, as far as I understand, Yuta Takahashi is one of the only players that's had a degree of success on this deck, so it's a bit hard for me to analyze the plays not having seen the deck.
I think Fairies is a deck where, because you're just blue-black are very strong control colors, except the answers are pretty narrow, so if you're able to really understand a metagame, you can tune your list to be decent, but there's no stock 75 or even a stock 70 that you would play. Sometimes Mistbind Click is good, sometimes it's awful. Same thing with a lot of the other cards like Liliana the Veil, Jace, etc. And Vinny just casting the cards. Perhaps hoping to hit an Experimental Frenzy off the top, maybe bait out a counterspell with something that's not that. And we're going to get a Cryptic on the Signal Pest.
That's fine. I'll animate Blink Mod.
Feels like overkill.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the leftovers in Zeke's hand, but it looks like there is another Cryptic command. I got a Fatal Push, Liliana the Veil, and Jace.
It's my Jace. I'm gonna brainstorm. Shit.
It's interesting when you're playing Fairies with Liliana the Veil plus Cryptic Command, when you decide to just start discarding cards when you have a lot of cards in hand and your opponent doesn't. It seems like a lot of conflicting directions that you can take that in.
Right, it's one of those dyssynergies that you really have to understand the deck well to actually work around. It seems like it would be difficult to just kind of pick it up and intuitively know how to play lines.
So you're going to get a Fetch Shock and a Fatal Push.
Play Aspire.
Vinny has that hands on table hand posture. No hand to speak of.
It seems like this has to be one of the worst kind of fringe matchups that you can face if you're Affinity. And Zeke with that cryptic command in hand is probably on the plus Jace mode and ultimate that for the
Cast two
win.
overseer. Counter draw. Good.
How much more of this do you think Vinny can take?
I
Yep.
I am unsure. Ah, and it gets
Force
left on
fire
top.
ministry.
Go.
So Zeke not deploying the Liliana the
Cast
Veil
one again.
there.
Sure. This is
And Welding Jar is spell stuttered. It's really interesting pivot points here when you have Jace Liliana
bottom that one.
to just not play the Liliana the Veil here.
Go.
Right. Well,
Yeah, second phase.
it's not really doing a whole lot with the Ornithopter there to take the minus.
Zeke thinking about Snapcaster Cryptic Command?
Seems right. Yeah.
And
Second Welding
Zeke
Jar?
continuing to plus and leaving
Cast one.
known cards
Yep.
on top.
Go ahead.
Vinny not wanting to attack into that menacing spell stutter sprite.
Yep.
He's gonna have to this next turn. Jace is in ult range.
Go to combat.
Tap the team.
Yeah. Thanks.
Alright, that is a scoop 'em up for Vinny there. We're going to see a
So
Jace
many
ultimate the
rules.
next turn.
That seems like a very reasonable line to take by Vinny.
Yeah, it did seem like it was a pretty anemic start against what ended up being a particularly bad matchup. As far as sideboarding is concerned, I'd imagine Zeke probably has some number of Liliana the Last Hope in the sideboard, perhaps. I could see those coming in. The plus is almost like an Is It Staticaster effect against Vinny if you're not playing red. Vinny, I saw some Blood Moons on the sideboard. It's curious against a two-color deck, but it might almost be worth bringing in because Faeries does play a lot of non-basic lands, and they're really trying to get to that cryptic command mana, and they've got Creeping Tar Pits, plus some number of Mutavaults, a lot of dual lands. You have a lot of double black, double blue spells, so usually early on in the game, you're fetching for non-basics. I could see, especially being on the play of Blood Moon, kind of at least getting Zeke for a while to prevent as much interaction like Snapcaster Fatal Pushes happening.
Yeah, it looks like some lists playing as little as 5 basics.
Yeah, usually you're just on enough islands to be able to cast Cryptic, and then a swamp or two.
How do you feel like Faeries is in the meta currently? It looks like some lists playing Kalidas main deck, which, you know, I think that card has been pretty good of late.
Yeah, Kalidas plus Liliana of the Veil is a pretty strong interaction. Kalidas is just generally good. I've played a fair amount of blue-black fairies and then like vacillated between fairies and then dropping the fairies cards and playing control. Um, I the issue I had with the deck is that you don't have a very fast clock. So against like land-based decks or combo decks, you can generally stop like the first barrage of spells with counter spells for the win, but then you have a really hard time turning a corner and actually like attacking or having a win condition.
Yeah, it feels like maybe critical mass of Bitter Blossom tokens is one of the only ways to do it. Otherwise, you're looking for a Jace ult or
Jace ult, and
some
then
creeping tar pit beats.
a lot of times you can attack with like Creeping Tar Pit plus Mutavaults, sometimes 2 Creeping Tar Pits plus a Mutavault once you get to the late game. Definitely is not as fast as a Celestial Colonnade win.
So Vinny looking at 1 Spire in hand, looks like a Vault Scourge, a Ravager, couple Galvanic Blasts. No, an Experimental Frenzy, a Galvanic Blast, an Ornithopter, and a Springleaf Drum.
Okay, so we have a turn 1 land Ornithopter, Springleaf Drum. Vault Scourge seems like a strong start. You can follow that up with a Ravager, which blanks some of the fatal pushes. So it seems like a decent hand. Could use a land draw or a Mox Opal or 2 off the top, but seems very serviceable.
Yeah, I like that hand. I think if he can get Zeke on the back foot reacting, and then he can manage to slam that experimental frenzy. Once that's on the battlefield, Zeke's in blue-black, so it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, at least not for a couple months.
Yeah. Or it's getting eventually cryptic back to hand and tried to hit on the way back down, but I imagine Vinny will probably have gotten the advantage that he needs at that point.
And we did have that turn 1 play with the Springleaf Drum Ornithopter Vault Scourge, so Vinny dropping to 18, and Zeke is going to fetch, shock, and Serum Vision.
I was recently in the market for Serum Visions, looking online. That version of Serum Visions, the promo version's like less expensive than 5th Dawn non-foil Serum Visions right now.
Okay, yeah, it seems like 5th Dawn was not the most open set, and that was an FNM promo a couple years ago, so a lot of those floating around. Plus, you know, there's some questionable art going on there. Looks like we have a Ravager for Vinny and just a swing for 1. Curious if we're going to have a post-combat spell, but nope. Passing a turn.
Vinny with a very serviceable board here and 1 away from that experimental frenzy.
Looks like there is a Galblast in hand to maybe deal with the Planeswalkers.
And he's got it up with the Springleaf Drum Ornithopter over there, so...
Oh. So it looks like Vinny's probably going to be able to resolve this Experimental Frenzy if there's a Mox or a land on top, as Zeke is Serum Visioning, and that doesn't get hit with Ceremonious Rejection, and we just have a tap land. So I would be kind of excited to see how many things that Vinny can play. How many permanents are we going to get in the next 2 turns if we
You
get
think?
a land?
Oh, Vinny's going to go upstairs. I like that, sensing that Zeke has a very slow hand here, and just, you know, Vinny being an experienced Affinity pilot.
So we don't get that land, but we do get a Signal Pest.
Go to combat.
And perhaps Vinny's considering maybe eating an Ornithopter here,
Yeah, just 2. I go
but
20.
it's just going to swing for 2.
Go ahead.
Vinny's going up to 20, Zeke going down to 10.
That's tough because Zeke's sitting on a grip full of cards. It feels like sacking anything before you're forced to, especially for, you know, something as small as an extra point of damage. Maybe in the long run, Vinny's feeling like that's just not gonna do it, and being able to, you know, have an extra creature out here to sack to Liliana, pretty big game.
That makes sense. And it seems like this Ornithopter is going to do just that. Okay, land, Mox, Cranial Plating, so that's
a good
serviceable
draw. You probably do need to point one damage at that Liliana, huh? If you would have been able to land that frenzy, obviously you're not worried about her.
Correct.
But at this point, and it looks like he is sending the
So
Ravager at
we have
Liliana.
6 points going at Zeke, so Vinny will bump up to 26, Zeke will go to 4, and taking care of that Liliana the Veil.
So Zeke's looking for Damnation here. He's waiting for Toxic Deluge to be printed in Modern Horizons.
I would be surprised if Faeries didn't have a Damnation R2 hanging out in the sideboard. And Vinny hits a land, but if we're at Cryptic Command here, it gets awkward because Zeke's probably going to tap down his team inside of combat before attackers. If I was Vinny, I might be tricky and go to say something like leave my first main phase to see if I could get my opponent to tap me down.
I'm definitely on board. And Vinny doing exactly that.
I think Vinny just said combat, which
Oh,
I feel
okay.
like that's communication here.
Ah, right, because he can't use the Springleaf Drum.
Correct. So Zeke not drawing the Damnation and stuck on 4.
Do you just jam now? 2 Experimental Frenzies in hand? Do you just Throw one down and hope that there's no cryptic.
And for chain.
Oh, it resolves.
All right.
Here we go.
He played 2 lands.
Go to combat. Swings.
Zeke's looking for some fatal push, snap, fatal push here.
There is a Snapcaster hanging out in Zeke's hand. I don't really think Fiddy has to sack anything right here.
No, I think he can totally just let this happen and just bury Zeke. He's got his frenzy down. The whole deck is his oyster next turn.
As long as we don't get a ton of lands on top.
Second main phase.
Yeah.
Redeveloping the board here. Oh boy.
Zeke lets out a my god.
So Vinny dropping down to 14.
6 cards. Yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, Damnation only would solve the issue of the next turn, but with that Experimental Frenzy out there, then he would have to have a whole lot of lands in a row for that to be good enough.
I think until he can do something about that frenzy, he's not going anywhere. You know, Vinny can just continue to redeploy, even if he's sweeping the board.
And I think that is one of the downsides of just playing blue-black fairies is, you know, your engineered explosives only goes up to 2 if that's on the sideboard. There's not a lot you can do to remove an enchantment except for countering it. And in Modern, you have pretty narrow counters. You have Ceremonious Rejection on the sideboard, or you have your 2-mana Logic Knot, but not necessarily always going to have the right counterspell for an enchantment in hand. And also, with one thing I found out playing a fair amount of fairies and then just straight up blue-black control is even though you're just playing 2 colors, the mana is kind of awkward in fairies. You have to play usually 3 tar pits at least for a win condition, along with a maybe 1 to 2 Mutavaults to turn on spells that are actually countering something that costs more than 1, which Modern has a lot of 2s and 3s. And so you get into places where you want to cast Cryptic, but you only have tap lands, or maybe you have Mutavaults plus Field of Ruin plus 2 other lands. So it's, yeah, mana can be awkward for Zeke.
How do you feel about engineered explosives on Zeke's side in this matchup?
I like it. I bring it in against Affinity pretty much, even if you're a 2-color deck. Being able to hit a lot of 2s is sometimes really important with like Ravager, Bolt Scourge, Cranial Plating, etc. And then sometimes you can get them on 0 if they take a really aggressive line with like 1 land, a bunch of Ornithopters, and Springleaf Drum.
Huh. Sequencing. Yeah. Magic's hard. Yeah.
This is a fun matchup to watch, though. I feel like before Experimental Frenzy was printed, I definitely would think that Faeries is favored, and I still think it's probably still favored, but Experimental Frenzy lets Affinity have a real bomb play that Faeries has to kind of play around.
Right, it actually gives him some threat once he's kind of spewed his hand onto the table. He's got...
So it looks like Vinny's got a Vault Scourge, some lands, Arcbound Ravager, Mox, and a Galvblast, which Galvblast seems like one of the weaker cards in the matchup. You do kind of have to leave Sun Number in to take care of some Planeswalkers, I think.
Yeah, it's nice to have reach.
And picked up a Cranial Plating, so Vinny's sitting with all the cool 2-drops. Curious how many spell snares that Zeke is going to be playing. So Mox Opal that is not turned on quite yet.
That's embarrassing on camera.
Ooh, yeah, we got a little bit of a dig there. We got 2 different Serum Vision arts, and 1 foil, 1 non-foil. Oh, okay, that would have been really great if that was a 3rd different art, but No. I think there was, I'm not, maybe it was a Judge promo. There was some kind of promo foil Serum Vision as well. That is same art as Fifth Dawn, but you get the little shooting star.
Gotcha. Well, Zeke leaves 2 cards on top here, so, you know, after sculpting with 3 Serum Visions, he's found some stuff he thinks is worth casting.
In for 1, 2, 3, 4.
And swinging in for an 8-point life swing, 4 damage for Zeke and gaining 4 life for Vinny. So this matchup isn't really about life points, though. At least for as far as Vinny's concerned, on how many points Vinny gains isn't going to determine whether Vinny wins or loses.
Right. But I like, you know, we were talking about the Gal Blast earlier. We'll see if Zeke ever manages to drop a Bitter Blossom here. Oh,
And we got a Bitter Blossom.
call shots. But his life can start to be really important. If Vinny can even get him kind of close to dead, he can kind of play that burn game a little bit.
All right, we get another Spire and an Ornithopter. Really curious if this if Zeke has this Spell Snare too. That's quite the blowout.
You know, it's really good at blocking Vault Scourge.
Fairy Rogue token.
Yeah.
Okay, this is definitely Spell Snareable. Does not have it.
Still with me. Combat. Swing. No effects before damage. I'll activate.
Okay.
And Vinny's activating that, so
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
we're at 7 damage here.
9, I'm at 29. And pass.
I think I see double Galv Blast in Vinny's hand as well. So
Well, that's lining up very well.
looks like you can just swing out and cast some Galv Blast.
These are the type of affinity decks that make, or the affinity draws that make these kind of medium draws from other decks just look so silly. Where you spend your first 2 turns cantripping and all of a sudden affinity just has you dead.
Yeah, that's why I've really liked Opt as a card over Serum Vision, especially when playing Snapcaster decks, is it allows you to hold up interaction, or at least bluff interaction, without tapping out. When Zeke tapped out for these Serum Visions, it basically allowed Vinny to resolve the best cards that he wanted to instead of playing around spells, which I feel like is important as a control deck to make your opponent think you could have something.
So Vinny had the option there of animating the Inkmoth Nexus and sacking it to the Ravager to nullify that Field of Ruin.
Yeah.
He chose not to get the untapped mountain
Well, I mean,
so
if
that
you're
he can double Galv Blast.
playing an Arabian Nights Mountain in your deck and you're on camera, I feel like you kind of want to make sure that that sees play.
That's fair, regardless of strategic implication.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, thank you, Neltrano, for another month of subscription. Yeah, that helps us out a whole lot. We're looking at upgrading some equipment here, doing some more streams, starting a monthly event, and going to be streaming from some different stores, too. So, yeah, thanks for subscribing, everyone in chat right now.
And Feudal, you can totally only subscribe for the badges. We're all about that. We have not even really discussed a Patreon.
Yeah.
So
We should probably think about that.
might be something down the road to look at, but very excited that you are
Wait,
interested in.
You're
helping
very
us, so-
excited?
Yeah, that's what I said.
Vinny just rubbing it in with that Edge Champion there.
Did
I guess just attacking? Don't you want to?
Oh, okay. And then in response, before damage, you're at 6? Yes.
Just,
2,
do we not have a Geld Blast in hand?
3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay, there we go. Scooping him up.
all right. That's Affinity.
Yeah, I feel like whenever I play Affinity, when I'm playing Jeskai Control, which is my go-to modern deck, It's like you're supposed to have a good matchup, but then you have games like this where
I
Affinity
can't.
does
I
Affinity things
didn't
and
want
you
to
just lose.
because I had
Alright,
experimental
so I'm
printing,
going to
so I
step
wanted
out
before the
there
game.
and
Like I
see
didn't
if
want to
we
turn
can
myself
scout
in
out
before.
anyone that is in between
And
games
like maybe you
and
followed it
bring
up
another
with
match of Modern here
discard
because we've got
spell, but
about
then
20
like
minutes left. So
I don't
we'll
know.
be back shortly.
It's okay, I guess. Like.